Notes All Connection. Welcome into another No Holds Barred special edition. What if? JT and Aaron here on the home of North South Connection on YouTube. Of course, we have a lot of content, both video and audio. You can find us on any podcast application by searching North South Connection. Follow us on social media as well. Right now, Ryan Gray and I are counting down every single WrestleMania match ever, all 402 of them. We have about 5 shorts dropping a day. They're all about a minute long. Started on January 1st. We're wrapping up at this year's Mania. So be sure to subscribe across TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. They're all being posted across everything. And be sure to weigh in with your thoughts on those rankings. You can also, if you have any thoughts on future what if ideas, leave them in the comments of this video. And we'll be sure to add them to the backlog. And we'll run through them as we go through future iterations. Aaron, how are you?
I'm good. And everyone understand, too, I know we've gotten a bunch of ideas, but I want everybody to understand, too, that a lot of the ideas are similar. Right. So if we don't get to something right away, it's possible because, we just talked about this, or it was too similar to that, or we felt we dealt with it. So it's not a question of your suggestion was bad or anything. We might have just talked about it along the way somewhere else. Aside from that, I'm good. My question is, what if I was happy?
Oh, what a world that would be.
I know, right?
Think of the things we would accomplish if you weren't a miserable prick.
I don't know why you had to add prick.
Yeah, I guess you'd be a prick either way. All right. This what if comes courtesy of our good friend producer, Timothy, the Tool Man Taylor. Not the Tool Man
Timothy.
Yeah. Well, no, Timothy. He has a what if question of what if Eric Bischoff bought WCW in 2001?
You know, as soon as you said Tim, I was expecting a Roman Reigns question.
I got about 35 of those lined up. All right. Gut reaction. Bischoff buys WCW. Is it still in business?
Yeah.
Oh,
I think it is. But how it's in business is the question. Because from everything I understand, I'm pretty sure Bischoff swears by this, is that no matter what, it was getting canceled off Turner TV.
Correct.
So that goes away. Yeah, so I think I mean, look, what's your gut?
I think so. I think what they need to do, they need to last until 2005, and then they're set. Okay, because if you look at the history of TNA does the pay-per-view only model because there's no cable outlet out there for a new promotion. Then they get Fox Sports Net in 2004. It's kind of syndicated. It's in the afternoons on Fridays. 2005. The big gap opens when
they get Spike, right?
When WWE jumps back to USA.
That's right.
And Spike TV is wide open in the fall of 2005. And that's where TNA ends up at that time and really is what kind of jumps them up a level to the most successful run, I think, as a competitor is that 2005 to 2009 in there, right? It's when they're kind of the most legit. Maybe today they're kind of getting there, but I would say that run of 2005 to 2009 is when they were legitimate competition because they had a major network deal on a cable company that was carried by most. And then you start getting toward 12, 13, 14, streaming, et cetera, comes in, right? So
once Bischoff, they get there, once they get there, they're good. They're in really good shape.
Right, because Bischoff, I think, is forward-thinking enough to have probably been on the edge of that. Like, I think he's probably in early on the streaming stuff. So I think he really has to survive. Now, TNA couldn't get a TV deal because they were a brand new program, right? New promotion with unproven stars. WCW has the name. They have Eric Bischoff, and they probably have a few more stars still hanging around.
They have all their contracts.
Right. So Goldberg is still there. Flair is still there. Steiner's still there. Sting is still there. Nash, Hall, all those guys are there. Because,
if Bischoff buys it, I would imagine that he gets the same. I don't know if he has to pay the same amount, but it's the same. Those contracts are still Time Warner contracts, right? And I would venture, and I could be wrong, that he's in no position to buy anybody out. So the guys that sat out, they would have to choose to come and work. And I think there are some that might, but there are some that might not, because it'd be interesting to see how much he could pay people, right? Because I feel like if he could pay Goldberg the same amount, Goldberg might come. Right. I feel like Kevin Nash and Scott Hall might just not come. And at all.
So where are they airing? Because if he buys them, it's because he has TV, right?
Yeah.
So in this world, does he convince TNT to keep them around? Or does he go knock into USA and say, hey, you just lost WWF. You know, I have names. I got name talent. Give me a 1 hour slot to start. And let me bring WCW to USA. And we're gonna have Scott Steiner. We got DDP. I'll bring in a Rob Van Dam. My new voice of my promotion is gonna be Joey Styles. I'm bringing in, you know, whoever, Tommy Dreamer, Sabu. Like, I'm gonna have some faces that people know from pay-per-view on ECW. I got some young stars and some name value.
Do they get Rob Van Dam too?
He's going. I mean, that if you believe the history is that RVD, when WCW closed, RVD, I think him, Dreamer, and I think Joey Styles were pretty much planning, like that was the plan, was to bring them in. I think RVD is 100% a lock. I think he's going.
Yeah. Do they basically take ECW without the name?
I would say they get a lot of it. Like, I think Heyman is still going to the WWF. Like, I think
that's for sure.
And you're still going to get some people going there, Spike and Rhino, and like Jerry's already there. So I think some of those guys are still going. I think WCW is more likely to get maybe some of the more athletic guys if that was the direction they were trying to go. But I think RVD. I don't know if you'd even need more than that. I think RVD and Joey Styles are going. Do you take Just Incredible and Dreamer and Sandman back? I mean, maybe, but whatever. Like, if they get RVD and they get Styles to call the show, like, I think that's too, because who's the main play-by-play guy at the end? Hudson?
Yeah, it's Shivani and Hudson. It's both of them.
Yeah. So they needed a fresh voice. I mean, I like Hudson, but they need a fresh voice. So I think you bring Joey in. I think you bring Joey in, you bring RVD in. He had AJ Styles already there. He was already starting to get pushed. So that's a couple building blocks. I think you keep Steiner as a top heel, right? I think he's staying around. You know, DDP is staying around because he's Bischoff's boy. Yeah. He's not going anywhere.
What's interesting is all the guys that you kind of never heard of again. Like Sean O'Hare probably gets a massive push. All of those guys, hopefully not Mike Sanders, but all the rest of them probably get massive pushes. Guys like Alex Wright probably keep wrestling. Disco keeps wrestling. Who's the one I just thought of? Damn it. I lost it now. But there's somebody else in my Chronic. But there's somebody else, like, just there's a whole swath of guys that when WCW closes, it just goes away. Like, we lose not that it really matters that much, I guess, but we lose 2 years of Goldberg in his prime, right? Because it goes away. So I think it's all those little pieces. And then what happens to those guys who stay with WWE? All the guys who go over in the sale, because they're going to keep Lance Storm. They're going to keep Mike Awesome. They're going to keep Hugh Morris and Billy Kim. All those guys are still going to be there. So I think the roster actually looks pretty solid at that point.
I think the roster's in good shape. I think you have to figure out who your top guys are. So do you reset Goldberg, right? I'm guessing, again, I think Steiner stays your top heel. I think Booker stays one of your top faces. Jarrett probably just stays around. Does Hogan come back, right? Because him and Bischoff are boys, right? He was run off by Russo. He's in that XWA, and then he goes back to WWE. Does Bischoff keep him around?
You don't get the NWO in WWE. That's for sure.
No.
You might get the guys. They might all go back and as a faction, but you can't call it the NWO.
Right. No, that doesn't come over the trademark. So WWE is affected in a lot of ways, right? Because you're probably not. You might still get Goldberg and Flair down the road, but there's still competition that's legit. You're not getting the library, so that kind of affects like that nerdy end of it, like all the DVDs that kind of carry them into doing a 24/7, that carries them into doing a streaming network. Like, you're losing a huge chunk of your library that they rely on during that time period to be effective in that area.
Yeah. And then I think TNA ends up not existing.
Yeah, no, there's no reason, because Jarrett stays. Like, he's Bischoff's guy. Like, he's not going anywhere. Well, I guess he's more Russo's guy, so maybe he does. I don't know. But
I just
there's no gap. There's no
room for TNA. And then a lot of those TNA guys probably end up in WCW, or they get signed by WWF out of spite, right?
Right.
Like, I'm sure WWF
Daniels.
That's it. Like I was thinking about this the other day. Like, as you're watching TNA, especially if you start in the weekly pay-per-views, but even when you're doing the monthlies, like a team like America's Most Wanted, like
Mm-hmm.
that's somebody that someone should pick up. Like if WWF doesn't pick them up, WCW will, right?
Yeah.
And WCW will push them because they're an actual tag team and they like tag teams, as opposed to WWF that doesn't care, right?
So
there's
if they're still around today, is Bischoff still in charge, or does he sell eventually to someone? Does it get bought by a network, by anyone else, like it, or is it still is he still sitting here 20 years later in charge of the promotion?
No, I think Bischoff strikes me as a guy who would sell when the getting's good.
Yeah. So Fusion, I mean, Bischoff's not really the money guy, I guess. Anyway, it's Fusion, right?
Yeah.
So like, what do they become? I don't know if they're even still around. Or like, do they get bought by someone? You know?
Yeah. I mean, look, maybe the WWF eventually buys them, but
Right.
I would like to think that if they were able to stay alive until 2005, they're in a better position than TNA was, and they're able to grow more. Right now, will they compete with WWF? Probably not. But what it does do is, if at least there's enough money to be able to sign some guys, it gives everybody that option that they didn't have forever. Like, think of we talked about this a little while ago when we did the John Cena one, but we talked about how like John Cena drove people away from the product. Well, if there was a competing product that was accessible to everyone,
right?
Well, then maybe that ends up going up as a consequence. Maybe Vince McMahon never loses that creative juice, because let's be honest, since they beat WCW, the creativity in the company has never been the same. Right now, you could talk about some peaks. There's been peaks where it's been great, and there's been awesome things they've done, but they don't have that urgency to have to put on a great show. They don't have to put on a great show anymore. They can and they do, but they don't have to. And I would have liked for that to stay longer. That's what the hope of AEW was. And you can even see with AEW that they've improved since it came out, right? And since they've started. So I think you get more of that throughout the 2000s. And then the guys that don't make it in WWF, they have an outlet to go there and try there, as opposed to TNA,
Right.
which always looked like a downgrade, right? Even when they had Kurt Angle, even when they had like Hulk Hogan, it looked like a downgrade to go to TNA.
Yeah, so Fusion Media is more like a venture capital company. There was some guys that had run the Classic Sports Network that became ESPN Classic. I mean, they did. I didn't realize how like far this went. They did a full press release on January 11th, 2011, that they had bought WCW. Like Bischoff had like quotes and stuff about it. Like I didn't realize it was like that far along. And that TBS would have a minority stake in it and keep running the programming. So, yeah.
No, so they had the TV deal too. Because if they can stay on TBS, almost nothing changes.
Yeah, I mean, it even says in this, like WCW is going to begin again on May 6th with a pay-per-view called The Big Bang.
Yeah, that's right.
Negotiations were discussed with all the new talent. Bischoff even talked to personalities unfamiliar to WCW, like Joey Styles, to come on board. He even had laid out a detailed version for WCW. So there's some interesting stuff out there for sure. Creative was going to be Bischoff and John Laurinaitis, no Russo.
Good.
Yeah, it's such a big what if, because it's not like it had been gone that long. I mean, it wouldn't have been gone at all. They would have probably went dark for like a month and re-debuted.
Yeah.
It's such a what if overall for the entire wrestling world. Without that monopoly, like WWF probably still gets a little complacent, because I think the gap is going to be probably significant for a bit before WCW could even attempt to close it. But they probably still stay hungry. And then, like, where does something like Ring of Honor, like, do they still come around? They probably fill the ECW gap, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
But they may lose talent quicker.
I was thinking about this because, as I'm trying to figure out what to watch and how to watch it. So when I watch WCW, I think that the line is WCW, TNA, AEW. I think that's one line. And the other line is ECW, Ring of Honor, GCW. I think that's last part. So I think those are two separate lines. So I think Ring of Honor can still probably pop up and become the wrestling promotion. If WCW is smart, though, when they do switch, they probably do that anyway. Because with the talent they have, if they get AJ Styles and Rob Van Dam, and they've got, I think they still have Jerry Lynn under contract too. Like it's all the TNA guys at the start.
Yeah,
like I think you're smart.
No,
to
Lynn.
lean in.
I don't know if Lynn was Lynn. I think he was still in ECW.
Oh,
I think he's in ECW till the end. Yeah, because then he goes to WWF in April. He's like
Yeah.
who wins the cruiserweight title and all that. So
Yeah, I'm just curious if he actually ends up going there. If
he may
WCW
go
is an
back.
option.
You're right. Yeah, he may go
Yeah.
back. I think you get two Bischoffs, right? You have the Bischoff that's a visionary a little bit, right? Like, so does he future project out to the youth and the athleticism, or does he edge back to old Bischoff, which is like get the big stars? Because what we're not talking about is does anyone jump from WWE back there, right? Like does Kurt Angle ever get frustrated with his ceiling and go over there? Just Brock Lesnar go there when he leaves WWF?
That's the interesting one, because in 2004 it's the schedule that he hates, right? So if you can come around and say, hey, by the way, I can let you wrestle, but I don't know, twice a month or whatever.
We don't do house shows, really. Who cares, right?
So that's a big get. Although I really do believe if they were to buy it in 2001, they probably have to do house shows to keep the revenue up in order to sign.
But maybe not as much, like they were never doing a ton anyway as a company.
No.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big. Yeah, right. You're right. Is there anyone that goes the other way that helps them sustain?
I'm trying to think of who is unhappy in like around 2002, 2003. Like, it's interesting, and because when you think of the guys that kind of get fucked over in that era, it's Rob Van Dam, it's Booker T. So it's like
they're already gone anyway.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, eventually, like what you want out of it is you want a company that's competitive enough to pay a competitive salary so that guys have choices, so they actually have to treat guys right, which is kind of what they have now, right?
Yeah. Because
for AEW, whether you like it or you love it, it pays guys, and they're able to leverage and get a deal and go there, and that's a really valuable thing for this industry,
right? And that's what was missing for so long.
So
I think the big question really, I mean, it comes down to the reason it died. Like, what does that TV deal look like? Can they stay afloat if they don't stay on TNT? If Bischoff can't convince them to keep the program alive in 2001, where do they go, and how do they keep breathing until maybe they jump to Spike when WWF leaves? I think USA seems to be the lifeline. There just wasn't as many cable outlets, and streaming on the internet wasn't a big enough option. So it's like, do they do the pay-per-view model that TNA would eventually do? I think
if they're able to maintain that TBS relationship, I think that's probably enough, at least short term.
Oh, that's it. They need to. I mean, to me, that's them or USA. I think without those two, I don't see how they make it where they end up.
Yeah, and I mean, you could probably. I mean, there's lots of things you can do. What we're not thinking about too is we talked about Bischoff, the visionary, right? Like, because when you look at what he's done in the past, like he was never a great booker, I don't think.
Right.
Like, although he hit a fucking Grand Slam home run with the NWO, and that was him, and you got to give him credit for it. But everything else is not that great. There's elements that are great, but he was smart enough to see that the athletic, fast-paced guys were going to be a thing and featured them. So what's the next thing? Does he lean into athletic women a bit more? Like, does he get ahead of that? Like, what's that next thing that he's able to kind of take and glob onto and present the Goldbergs and the Scott Steiners in the main event? You got your Rob Van Dams and AJ Styles for athletics. And then what's that third element that's like really gonna lock you in?
Do you think there's any world where Heyman goes there?
Yeah, it's not impossible.
Because Heyman doesn't go really to WWF until February when they need someone to replace Lawler. But him and Bischoff is more contentious. Him and Vince always had the working relationship, and WWF was funding them anyway. So unless Bischoff really goes hat in hand to Heyman and like, listen, I know ECW is going down. I got this new thing. Bygones be bygones. Come in and run the creative for me, right? I mean, then you go in a whole different direction, right?
or the other flip side is if they can find a way to bring ECW into that fold, right? Like, so that like almost like you have WCW Nitro on TBS and ECW show on another channel, and then when you want, you can cross them, you can invade them, you can do stuff like that. That's if there's a way to, like, I think if there was a way Fugent could keep ECW afloat, I think that's how you get Heyman.
Right.
By saying, hey, we're going to keep this going.
I don't think they care enough. Because I don't know if they have the cash like to do both. I think it's more like that ECW closes and they just offer him a job. They're like, you can come here and run our creative, because Heyman doesn't
Yeah.
really start booking until they really do. Like, I think he starts a little bit in the Invasion, but it's not until they split the brands and he takes over SmackDown that he becomes like a main creative guy. So,
But no matter
maybe,
what, I think they could get him later, like for sure.
yeah,
I think the window we're talking about is a bit more iffy, but I think once he kind of falls out with like Stephanie and like all that shit, I think you can probably scoop him up there.
not that it's a big name, but does Lawler go there? Like, if he still falls out with the cat thing and everything, like, does he go and work with Styles? Like, that's like a name that they could get out of the gate to bring Lawler over there as like your color. Like, you relaunch in May and your new commentary team is Joey Styles and Jerry the King Lawler for your main show, and maybe Hudson is a third guy or something. But
the other thing, I mean, that's it. The other thing too, they still have Hogan.
right.
Like, Hogan's still under contract until I think late 2001 or something. So they still have him. Like, so it's like you can build around him. Does Savage keep wrestling? Right? Like they're because like I guess he couldn't go back to WWF for unknown reasons. But
I think Savage is too broken down. I think maybe, but
or he's a commentator, or or you bring him in, or you bring in the guys like, so here's a guy that, not a huge thing, but I bet they could get him. Bring in fucking Jake the Snake to help with creative. Yeah. Like, the long-standing story with him is that he's always like, I just want to help. I want to help. And they're like, no, thank you. Like,
I mean, what about Flair too? Like, because like he's got his personal issues with Bischoff. Does he still leave at the end of 01 and go to WWF? Or does he give it a shot to stay and help rebuild? Sting? We didn't mention Sting. I think he stays for sure.
For sure.
Yeah, he's still there.
And he's not broken down. So he can still go.
Right. They just got to rebuild him after kind of a rough back end. I mean, you still got Dusty too, because Dusty ends up becoming a big player in developmental for WWE later, like with NXT and Turnbuckle Championship Wrestling and all that shit. Like, so does that not happen? Like, does he not go back? Like, does Bischoff keep him as a booker to help with WCW? So that could incredible. Be like
it's incredible how long he's with TNA for.
Right.
Like, I'm at the end of 05. He's still there. Like, he's still like on screen.
I think it's around. I think it's around then he goes back, because I went to Armageddon 05 and he was there. I saw him outside. So I think that's when he jumps. It's like December-ish, November, December 05.
Yeah.
But yes, he stays around. But think of all the producers that went to WWE out of jobs at WCW that may never go there. Fit Finley, who plays a big role in the development of the women later on. Malenko, Anderson, like all those.
Malenko.
I guess Malenko went as the Radicals, but Anderson, Arn, Finley, Johnny Ace, and Miss for the best. But
what do you mean?
But I mean, I think Finley's a big one, because if he doesn't jump, if he just stays there as an agent, like, does that affect the development of the women's wrestling later? Because he's always gets all the credit in the mid 2000s for spearheading them becoming like Trish and Mickey and Lita, like them kind of taking that step up and becoming more. So maybe to your point, maybe WCW becomes more of the kick off the women's stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I threw the women thing out there kind of as like what could be the next thing for him, but that makes actually a lot of sense to me. I think the future and what TNA represented was like, hey, there's this super athletic style. The problem with TNA is it didn't have the big names to go along with it. Now, I know they have a couple at the beginning, but it's not the same, right? But if you could present that athletic style, athletic women, and still have Hulk Hogan, Goldberg, Kevin Nash, whoever else is up there, Sting, Flair, that's a really interesting package. Like, it's different, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, we'll eventually get Hornswoggle in WCW, which might tank it, but
so I mean, I think WWE still stays big.
Yeah, they're not going anywhere.
I think what hurts them is they lose some talent, right? And I think they lose the historical ownership, right? So they don't drive the narrative of the history of wrestling anymore. Their DVDs, their documentaries, their programming, their library is stripped down more, for sure. Which is a big part of their success when they launch a network and all that, right? Is that they have all that to offer. That becomes property of WCW and Fusion and whoever else. And even if Fusion goes under, we don't know if WWF buys it, because there's a different world. So if WCW lives until 2009, is it still worth does WWE still buy them? Or do they see value in Bischoff saying, no, I'm keeping the fucking library. We'll go bankrupt as a company. I'm just going to make this a on-demand history of WCW channel, right?
Yeah.
So I think just them not buying them in 01 may still always prevent them from owning the history of it.
Yeah. And I'm curious what it does long term, because I think the business is healthier as a result, because I think that competition really helps. And I'm curious how it affects the psyche and the discourse of fans later on, because there's a really interesting thing happening now with AEW where it's like camps, right? Like it's either you love it or you hate it. And I think a lot of that has to do with the conditioning of WWF. And number one, the conditioning that they're always the underdogs, which they're clearly not, but I think you're conditioned from forever. They're always after us. The government's after us. WCW is putting us under. Everybody's stealing our talent. But I think that ends up growing because everybody gets used to there just being one big company for like 10 years. And so I think if you don't have that ever, I think people are more open-minded.
I think that tribalism, I think it's beyond wrestling. I think it's just the nature of social media. Because you see it with everything. It's you're either with or against, right? There's no gray. There's no in between.
All of it.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like all politics, sports. Yeah, it's it's just everything. It's like, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, listen, this was a really fun topic. If there's anything we missed that you think is worth including in this as a comment, leave it for us. What did we miss? Big names that could have jumped, or what they could have looked like. Is WCW still alive? What are your thoughts there? Let us know what we're missing in this, and any other subjects or topics you want us to cover, leave in the comments. Be sure to check out We Here at No Holds Barred every Saturday, both in audio and video. So we do some cool different projects there, and then just all the content like we mentioned earlier as well. Subscribe. So what if we wrapped up right now, Aaron? What if?